"You're a night guard," the CEO said, loud enough for the lobby to hear. "Not a man who makes requests. Clock out when you're told. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below." She let her eyes skate over his uniform like it embarrassed her. "One schedule change. If you can't handle nights, I'll replace you by morning." He didn't argue. Hands clasped behind his back, posture unbroken, he answered evenly. "Understood, ma'am." That calm should have ended it. Instead, it made her suspicious, like obedience was a mask. What nobody saw was why he'd asked, or the discipline behind that quiet control. Before she followed him after work and discovered what his child needed to survive, she'd already decided he was hiding something. Maine, Celeste Arundel's heels snapped across the marble toward the private elevators. She didn't look back. In her world, people were either assets or noise, and she'd already filed the night guard under noise. Rayan Holt waited until the elevator swallowed her. Only then did he release a measured breath, as if venting pressure from a sealed valve. His fingers brushed the cracked edge of his badge holder, an unconscious check that he still belonged here. The reception staff pretended to focus on their screens, but he felt their glances anyway, quick and guilty. Gideon Marr, the shift supervisor, hovered by the security office door with a clipboard hugged to his chest. "Rayan," he said quietly, then hesitated like the next words might cost him. Rayan gave him a small nod. Permission to speak, not permission to pity. "She's on one today," Gideon murmured. "Board's leaning on her. She's taking it out on whoever's closest." "The request still stands," Rayan said. "Same coverage. I can trade. I just need that one shift moved." "Why not HR?" "Because HR didn't measure a child's oxygen at 2 in the morning. Because forms didn't listen for wheezing in the dark." Rayan kept his face still. "HR won't move fast enough." Gideon's eyes flicked toward the executive elevators. "I could talk to her." "No." Firm, immediate, then softer. "Don't paint a target on your back." Gideon swallowed. "You okay?" Rayan nodded once. It meant, "I'm used to worse." It meant, "I can't afford to break." He stepped into the small glass-walled security room beside the lobby, the place designed to be seen but never respected. Cold coffee, warm electronics, monitors stacked like silent judges. Rayan logged in and began his rounds, camera sweep, door status, patrol timing, working with an efficiency that didn't match the pay grade on his uniform. Upstairs, Celeste entered her corner office, all glass and skyline, and still felt the sting of his calm under her skin. People begged her. People performed fear. That guard had simply endured. She pulled up the roster and stared at his name. Punctual, compliant, no incidents, ordinary on paper. She hit the intercom. "Lena, pull his file." Her assistant's voice came back careful. "Which employee?" "The night guard, Rayan Holt." "And what should I flag?" Celeste's jaw tightened. "Anything missing?" she said. "Anything that explains why he asked me for a schedule change like it mattered more than his job." Downstairs, evening thinned the suits and thickened the quiet. Rayan kept working, steady as a metronome, but his internal clock ticked louder. Somewhere beyond these walls, Noah would soon need him. A man drifted toward reception, leaning too close to the young receptionist. Rayan rose. "Sir, sign in." "I'm expected. Then you won't mind signing in." The man backed off, irritated, and left. Rayan sat again without pride, only noting the time and the exit. Gideon watched him through the glass, unsettled. "You ever do anything else before this?" he asked, trying to make it a joke. Rayan didn't answer. The past was a locked drawer, and opening it had consequences he couldn't afford. Upstairs, the file arrived, thin, sanitized, a gap where years should have been. Celeste's suspicion hardened into decision. She grabbed her coat. "Tell night security I'm staying late," she said, "and when he clocks out, call me." As her elevator descended, Rayan glanced at the lobby doors, feeling, without knowing why, that the air had changed. Power had turned its eyes toward the place it never looked. The elevator doors opened onto the lobby with a soft chime. Celeste stepped out, coat over one arm, expression neutral. The kind that made people straighten without knowing why. She didn't approach the security room. She drifted near the directory, pretending to read names she already owned. Through the glass, she watched the guard's profile. Still, alert, focused on screens that reflected light on his cheekbones. Rayan felt a pressure behind his eyes, the old instinct that told him he was being studied, measured, followed. His spine stayed straight anyway. The pressure didn't lift when the clock struck midnight. It settled deeper, heavier, like a storm deciding where to break. Rayan logged out exactly on time. Not a second early, not a second late. Routine mattered, precision mattered. He hung his badge inside the locker, not in his pocket, and swapped boots for worn sneakers that knew the shape of long walks. Across the lobby, Celeste pretended to finish an email on her phone while watching his reflection slide across the polished floor. He didn't rush, didn't check messages, didn't linger either. Just moved with intention, like every step had already been planned hours ago. Interesting, she thought. People at the bottom were usually desperate to leave or desperate to please. He was neither. Outside, night air slapped cold against concrete. The city hummed. Traffic breathing, distant sirens, a train crying somewhere underground. Rayan headed toward the bus stop instead of the parking garage. Celeste paused, irritation flashing. No car, no obvious escape. She waited 10 seconds, then followed at a distance that screamed discretion to people who'd never had to practice it. He stopped at the corner bodega, bought a small carton of milk, a banana, nothing else. Counted exact change. Celeste watched him check the receipt before folding it and tucking it into his jacket like proof mattered. "Why are you so careful?" she wondered. He boarded the bus just as the doors hissed closed. Celeste cursed under her breath and waved down a rideshare, snapping, "Follow that route." Power bought speed, but not subtlety. She sat rigid, eyes sharp, tracking intersections, memorizing turns like this was a hostile takeover instead of a man going home. The bus dropped him near a cluster of aging buildings that leaned into each other for support. Laundry hung from balconies. Light flickered unevenly. This wasn't where secrets hid. This was where life scraped by. Rayan crossed the street and paused. Not fear, calculation. Celeste slowed her car instinctively. He glanced left, then right, then adjusted his pace by half a second. Her pulse jumped. He knows, she realized. Or at least, he senses. She stayed back anyway, pride refusing retreat. Inside the building, the stairwell smelled like disinfectant and old paint. Rayan climbed without touching the rail, steps even, breathing controlled. On the third floor, a door opened before he reached it. "Dad?" a small voice called. That stopped Celeste cold. Rayan's shoulders softened instantly, like armor unlocking. "I'm here," he said, low and warm. He stepped inside. The decor closing on a slice of light and the faint sound of medical equipment humming. Celeste stood frozen in the stairwell, anger evaporating into something dangerously close to shame. A child, a real one, not a prop, not a photo on a desk. A voice that sounded thin, careful. She retreated a step, heart knocking harder than any boardroom confrontation ever had. Back in the car, she didn't leave right away. She watched the building as if answers might seep through brick. Her phone buzzed. Lena. His file's clean, her assistant said. Almost too clean. There's a gap. About 8 years, no explanation. Celeste closed her eyes. Run it again. I did. Then dig deeper. When she finally drove away, the city felt different. Smaller, less obedient. Upstairs, Rayan washed his hands for exactly 20 seconds. Noah lay propped on pillows. Tubing taped carefully against his skin, eyes bright despite the machine counting his breaths. Rayan checked the levels, adjusted a dial by millimeters, listened, not just with ears but with memory. You okay? Noah asked. Always, Rayan said. How's the chest? Feels tight. Rayan nodded, already recalculating. He moved with calm certainty, not panic. Panic wasted time. Later, when Noah slept, Rayan sat at the small kitchen table and opened a notebook filled with grids and notes no one at the office would ever understand. Shift swaps, transit timing, medication windows, risk buffers. The schedule change wasn't convenience. It was math, survival math. Across town, Celeste poured herself a drink she didn't finish. She replayed the night guard's posture, the way he'd absorbed humiliation without shrinking. She thought about her own childhood, on tutors, drivers, the luxury of never needing permission to care for someone. She didn't like the mirror forming. The next morning, the lobby buzzed with executive tension. A systems audit had flagged irregularities overnight, minor but embarrassing. Vendors blamed each other. Managers hovered. Rayan stepped into the security room, greeted by Gideon's tight smile. Big day, Gideon said. Rayan nodded. I noticed. By the way, Gideon added, lowering his voice, people are watching you more closely. Rayan met his eyes. I know. If you're still here, hit subscribe, because this is the moment where quiet routines start colliding with unchecked power. Upstairs, Celeste stared down at the lobby through glass, watching the night guard take his post like nothing in the world had shifted. She was wrong, and the ground was already moving under her feet. The ground didn't lurch all at once. It crept. Small misalignments. Delays that shouldn't exist. Rayan felt it the moment he logged in. Latency in the camera feeds. A half-second drift between door sensors and their confirmations. To most people, it was nothing. To him, it was a whisper before a collapse. He adjusted his chair, eyes moving across the monitors with slow intent. He didn't touch anything yet. First rule, observe before intervention. Systems told stories if you let them finish speaking. Behind him, the lobby filled with suits and perfume, the low hum of money arriving to work. Gideon leaned in the doorway, tension visible in the way he held his shoulders. IT's scrambling, Gideon said quietly. Audit flagged inconsistencies. Execs are already pissed. Rayan nodded once. It's not IT. Gideon blinked. What? The timestamps, Rayan said. They're off, but not randomly. It's a cascade from one node. Gideon stared at him. How do you... Morning? Celeste's voice cut in, sharp as a blade on glass. She stood just outside the security room, arms crossed, expression neutral but eyes alert. She'd dressed impeccably as always, but there was something different now. A tension that hadn't been there before, like curiosity fighting discipline. Explain, she said. Gideon stiffened. Rayan didn't. He turned slightly, careful not to loom, not to challenge. There's a synchronization fault between legacy access controls and the new monitoring layer. Celeste's jaw tightened. That's vendor territory. Yes, Rayan said, but the failure isn't the software. It's the order of operations. Someone forced an update during live hours. Silence followed, not the comfortable kind. Celeste studied him, searching for bravado, for overreach. She found none, just certainty, delivered without ego. "You're a night guard," she said again, slower this time. "Not an engineer." Rayan met her gaze. "I know what my badge says." Gideon swallowed hard. Celeste straightened. "Stay in your lane," she said, then turned on her heel. "I want this fixed in an hour." As she walked away, irritation flared. At herself, at him, at the fact that his calm unsettled her more now than his request had yesterday. The morning unraveled anyway. Doors lagged. Elevators paused between floors just long enough to raise blood pressure. Executives complained loudly about incompetence that never touched them directly. Vendors argued in conference rooms with glass walls, hands flying, words useless. Rayan stayed where he was, watching, mapping. He made a single adjustment, so small it barely registered, rerouting a check through a secondary path. The alarms stopped blinking red and settled into yellow. Temporary. Enough to prevent panic. Gideon noticed. "What did you just do?" "Bought time," Rayan said. "For who?" "For them," he said, nodding toward the elevators. "And for me." At noon, Celeste convened an emergency briefing in the atrium. Staff gathered on the edges, pretending not to listen while listening to everything. The imbalance was visible. Tailored suits front and center, uniforms pushed outward like furniture. She spoke crisply about temporary disruptions and swift resolution, then gestured toward the security room. "Even our guards noticed issues," she said lightly, "which tells you how minor this is." A ripple of restrained laughter followed. Rayan felt it like a hand on his chest. Not anger, calculation. He adjusted his stance, grounding himself the way he did when Noah's breathing hit the edge of normal. Gideon glanced at him, shame flashing. Celeste continued, "Let's all remember our roles." The words landed harder than intended. She saw it immediately, the way his jaw tightened just slightly. Not defiance, something older, something trained. The system chose that moment to stutter again. Lights dimmed, then steadied. A low alarm chirped from the control panel behind Rayan. The atrium quieted. He moved without asking. 2 steps to the panel. Fingers flying, not frantic, precise. He isolated a feed, bypassed a loop, resequenced the check order. The alarm died. Whispers followed. Celeste stared, heart kicking. That wasn't luck. That wasn't instinct. That was expertise. "What did you just do?" she demanded. Rayan didn't look at her. Prevented a rollback that would have locked 3 floors. A vendor stepped forward, pale. That's exactly what we were worried about. Celeste felt heat crawl up her neck. The humiliation wasn't his, it was hers. She recovered quickly, masking it with authority. "Fine," she said. "We'll review protocols later." Later. Always later. The crowd dispersed, but something had shifted. Eyes followed Rayan now, not dismissive, curious. Gideon exhaled. "You just saved my job." Rayan shook his head. "No, just delayed the problem." "And what's the problem?" Rayan glanced toward the executive elevators where Celeste had disappeared. Systems don't fail quietly unless they're being ignored. Upstairs, Celeste locked herself in her office and replayed the moment over and over. The way he'd moved, the way the room had gone still. Her phone buzzed. Lena again. "I found something," her assistant said, voice low. "It's not much, old certifications, government contracts. His name shows up, then vanishes." Celeste closed her eyes. The night guard wasn't hiding something illegal. He was hiding something valuable, and she had made it personal. Celeste didn't call him into her office. That would have given him ground he hadn't earned, at least in her mind. Instead, she summoned Gideon and two vendors and let the conversation orbit the truth without touching it. From the glass wall, she watched the security room like it might confess on its own. Rayan felt the attention the way some people felt weather. Pressure shifting. Air thinning. He kept his focus on the monitors, but his mind ran ahead, testing outcomes. When power stared too long, it eventually reached for leverage. By mid-afternoon, the building was operational but brittle. Temporary fixes stacked on temporary fixes. Rayan documented everything quietly, time-stamping discrepancies, noting who overrode what. Not for blame, for containment. Gideon hovered again. "She's digging," he said under his breath. "HR asked about you. Background stuff." Rayan didn't answer right away. He adjusted a camera angle by a degree most people wouldn't notice. They won't find what they're looking for. "And what is that?" "Permission," Rayan said. Gideon frowned. "For what? To put me back where I came from?" That unsettled Gideon more than any system alert. "Where was that?" Rayan finally looked at him, not revealing, just honest. A place where mistakes cost lives. The afternoon dragged. Celeste stayed behind glass, posture perfect, expression controlled. But the certainty she'd built her career on had cracked. Every report contradicted itself. Every expert hedged. The only consistency was the man she'd dismissed. At 5:47, she made her decision. She took the stairs down instead of the elevator. Power preferred shortcuts. She wanted proximity. The security room door was open. Rayan stood ready, the way he always did when someone entered his space. Not submissive, not aggressive. Present. "Walk with me," she said. It wasn't a request. They moved through the service corridor. Concrete walls replacing glass. The hum of systems louder here. This was where the building's real body lived. Pipes, cables, heat. "You asked for a schedule change," Celeste said, eyes forward. "Why?" Rayan didn't hesitate. "Because I need to be home earlier 2 nights a week." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I'm offering." She stopped, turned. "You embarrassed me today." He met her gaze evenly. "That wasn't my intent. But it was the result. Yes." The honesty threw her. She expected denial, excuses, gratitude, not this. "You overstepped," she said. "I prevented a failure. From a position you don't hold." Rayan's jaw tightened, just slightly. "Positions don't fix systems, people do." Silence stretched. The corridor amplified every breath, every distant clang. Celeste searched his face for fear, found none. What she found instead was restraint, the kind forged, not learned. "You could have said something earlier," she said. "I did," Rayan replied. "You dismissed it." Her mouth thinned. She hated being right and wrong at the same time. "HR will complete its review," she said coolly. "Until then, stay in your lane." Rayan nodded. "I am." She turned away, heels echoing, control reasserted, or so she told herself. At 6 sharp, Rayan clocked out. Celeste waited 5 minutes before following. This time, she didn't pretend it was coincidence. She kept enough distance to feel clever, not enough to stay invisible. He didn't look back, but his pace shifted, subtle, deliberate. He crossed at yellow lights. Took turns that forced decisions. She followed anyway. The city darkened into something more honest as they moved away from the tower. The neighborhoods changed. The buildings lowered their shoulders. This was a place without buffer zones. Rayan stopped at a pharmacy. Celeste watched from across the street as he studied labels with focus that bordered on reverence. He chose carefully, checked his phone, put one item back, selected another. When he emerged, he headed toward the same building as the night before. This time, Celeste didn't stay in the car. She followed him inside, keeping her steps light, heart beating harder than it ever had in a boardroom. On the third floor, the door opened before he reached it again. "Dad?" the voice called. Rayon's entire posture changed, like gravity had shifted. "I'm here," he said. Celeste froze at the corner of the stairwell. Inside the apartment, she heard the faint beep of a monitor, heard Rayon speaking softly, counting under his breath. Not words meant for anyone else. She backed away, pulse loud in her ears. This wasn't a secret worth punishing. This was a responsibility she'd never had to earn. Downstairs, she stood in the lobby, hands shaking for the first time in years. Her phone buzzed. "Lena." "I confirmed it," her assistant said. "The Gap." He was a systems engineer on classified infrastructure projects, emergency response high level. Celeste closed her eyes. The night guard wasn't hiding incompetence. He was hiding his life, and she had been stepping on it without looking. Celeste didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the stairwell, the way his shoulders had softened at the sound of his child's voice. Power had never followed her home before. It stayed where she left it. This followed her anyway. Morning came sharp and unforgiving. By the time she arrived at the tower, the building was already restless. A second audit had triggered automatically overnight, cascading through systems that were never meant to be stressed twice in 24 hours. Vendors flooded inboxes with explanations that explained nothing. Executives circled like predators looking for a weak limb to tear free. Rayon felt it the moment he stepped into the security room. The air hummed wrong. Screens blinked with alerts that weren't read yet, but wanted to be. He set his bag down carefully, the cracked lunchbox resting beside it for a breath longer than necessary. He checked his watch, calculated margins. Noah had been stable when he left. That didn't mean he would stay that way. Gideon appeared, eyes wide. "They're calling it a containment anomaly." Rayon nodded. "It's a sequencing failure." "You're sure?" "I was sure yesterday." Across the lobby, Celeste watched him from behind glass, the weight of knowledge pressing on her chest. She knew now, not the details, not the stories, but enough. Enough to understand that she had been wrong in a way money couldn't smooth over. The first system locked at 9:12. A restricted floor went dark, not power, but access. Executives trapped behind doors that refused to acknowledge credentials. Panic snapped through the building like a live wire. "This is unacceptable," someone shouted. Celeste moved fast, heels forgotten, authority stripped down to urgency. "Where's security?" All eyes turned. Rayon was already moving. He didn't ask permission. He didn't look at her. He stepped into the control space and began isolating nodes, hands steady, breath measured. He murmured numbers under his breath, not prayers, procedures. A vendor leaned in. "If you bypass that, you'll trip the—" "I know," Rayon said. "I designed systems like this to fail safely." The room went silent. Celeste felt the moment tilt. This was the edge, the place where denial either hardened or broke. "What do you need?" she asked. Rayon finally looked at her, not with triumph, with calculation. "Time, and no one undoing my work." She nodded, sharp, immediate. "Everyone out." It happened in front of witnesses, executives, vendors, staff who'd heard her dismiss him the day before. Power stepped aside. Rayon rerouted the sequence, manually staggering authentication so pressure bled off instead of spiking. The locked floor released. Lights steadied. The building exhaled. Applause started somewhere near the back. It died quickly, awkward in the face of what it meant. Celeste swallowed. "Thank you," she said. He didn't respond. He was already checking the next risk point. Gideon leaned close. "You good?" "For now," Rayan said. Then quieter, "I need to leave early today." Gideon hesitated, then glanced at Celeste. She heard it. She felt the eyes waiting for her decision. "Yes," she said. "Go." The word landed like a fracture healing. Rayan gathered his things. As he lifted the lunchbox, Celeste saw it clearly for the first time. The medical pouch taped carefully to its side, worn but meticulously maintained. Not hidden, integrated, survival built into routine. He paused at the door, not looking back. "The system will need a deeper fix. I can outline it." "We'll talk," Celeste said. He nodded once and left. The building buzzed after, voices overlapping, narratives forming. Some people saw a hero, some saw a threat. Celeste saw a ledger she needed to balance. She retreated to her office and closed the door. For the first time, she didn't sit behind the desk. She stood by the window, watching the city that had always bent to her will. Lena's voice came softly through the speaker. "Do you want me to formalize his role?" "No," Celeste said. "Not yet." She needed to do this right, not as a reward, as a correction. Down the street, Rayan moved fast, tension riding his spine. The margin had narrowed. He boarded the bus, checking his phone, recalculating. Every delay felt heavier now that the building had demanded more of him. When he reached the apartment, and the door opened too slowly. "Dad," Noah said, voice tight. Rayan dropped his bag and crossed the room in 3 steps. He checked the monitor, adjusted a dial, listened with his whole body. "It's okay," he said, even as his heart hammered. "I've got you." Later, when Noah slept again, Rayan sat at the table and wrote new margins into the notebook. Thinner ones, riskier ones. Back at the tower, Celeste stared at the same margins on a very different page. The cost of arrogance. The weight of power used carelessly. If you're still here, subscribe, because what happens next isn't about promotion or punishment. It's about whether power can learn to bend. She picked up the phone and made a call she should have made days ago. "Find me every policy we have on employee accommodations," she said. "All of them." The building stood quiet. But the reckoning had only just begun. The call didn't go the way Celeste expected. Policies existed, yes, but they were thin, conditional, buried under approvals designed to discourage use. Accommodations were framed as favors, not rights. She read every line with growing discomfort, recognizing her own fingerprints in the language. Efficiency, flexibility, business needs first. She closed the file and stared at the city, wondering how many people she'd pushed into silence without ever knowing their names. Down below, the building ran smoothly for the first time in days. Rayan had left behind a temporary map, clean, logical, annotated just enough to keep others from undoing it. He hadn't signed it, he never did. Credit was weight, and weight slowed movement. At the apartment, Noah slept again, color better than before. Rayan stayed close anyway, listening for the smallest change. He trusted data, but he trusted patterns more. Bodies had rhythms. Systems did too, miss either and things failed. A knock came at the door. Rayan froze. No one knocked here unless something was wrong. He opened it a fraction. Mrs. Calder, the neighbor from down the hall, stood with a paper bag clutched to her chest, eyes kind but worried. "I saw you rush in earlier," she said softly. "Thought you might have forgotten dinner." Rayan exhaled. "Thank you." She glanced past him, toward the steady glow of the monitor. "How's he doing?" "Stable," Rayan said. "For now." Mrs. Calder nodded, like that meant more than the word itself. The shuttle driver said they might change routes next month, fewer stops. Rayan's jaw tightened. Did he say when? Just that it's coming. Another variable, another margin shaved. I'll figure it out, Rayan said, more to himself than her. She hesitated. You always do. After she left, Rayan sat at the table and redrew the schedule again, factoring in longer travel times, fewer options. The math was getting tighter. Tight math failed catastrophically. Across town, Celeste drove without her usual route, letting the city choose for her. She parked near the clinic without quite knowing why, and watched families move in and out. Parents tired in ways money couldn't fix, kids braver than they should have had to be. She thought of the medical pouch taped to the lunchbox. Not hidden, integrated. When she finally left the car, she didn't go inside. She waited near the shuttle bay, blending in poorly, her coat too sharp, her posture too certain. She saw Rayan before he saw her, recognized the way he scanned exits, the way his attention split cleanly between the world and the small figure beside him. Noah walked carefully, one hand gripping his father's sleeve. You can wait here, Rayan said gently. I want to see the bus, Noah replied. Celeste stayed where she was, unseen, listening to a life she'd never had to plan. The shuttle driver stepped down, clipboard in hand. Holt? He called. Rayan nodded. I heard there might be changes. The driver grimaced. Word is they're cutting the stop. Too few riders. When? Rayan asked. Couple weeks. I'm sorry. Celeste felt the words land like a blow. Too few riders. As if survival could be averaged. Rayan absorbed it, eyes narrowing, not in anger but in calculation. If the route shifts east, he said. Could we still make the appointment window? The driver shook his head. Not without leaving earlier, and I don't know how you'd manage that with work. Rayan didn't answer. Noah looked up. It's okay, Dad. Rayan smiled, soft and fierce at the same time. We'll adjust. Celeste turned away before she was seen, heart pounding harder than it had during the system failure. This was the crisis money didn't patch. This was logistics against biology. Back at the tower, she called Lena. How hard would it be to sponsor a shuttle route? There was a pause. Not hard, but it would raise questions. Good, Celeste said. I want answers, not optics. She hung up and sat alone in her office, the glass no longer feeling like protection. She thought about the way Rayan never asked for help unless the system itself demanded it. How he carried everything else silently. The next morning, HR sent her a summary of Rayan's file, what little existed, certifications, clearances, commendations stripped of context, a person reduced to data points, then filed away. Celeste closed the document and made another decision. She walked to the security room herself. Rayan looked up, surprised this time. Ma'am? Walk with me, she said. Please. The word mattered. She knew it did. They moved through the same service corridor as before, but the air felt different, less sharp, more honest. I followed you, Celeste said. After work. Rayan stopped. I saw your son, she continued quickly. I didn't mean to intrude. Silence stretched. Heavy. Dangerous. You shouldn't have, Rayan said finally. I know, she replied, and I'm sorry. The apology sat between them, fragile and real. This isn't about your job, she said. It never should have been. Rayan studied her, measuring sincerity the way he measured systems, looking for strain, for false reinforcement. I don't want special treatment, he said. I don't want to give it, Celeste replied. I want to fix what's broken. He nodded slowly. Not agreement. Permission to continue. For the first time since she'd dismissed him, Celeste understood the scale of what she'd ignored. This wasn't a request. It was a life balanced on margins no one else had bothered to see. The corridor seemed narrower after the apology, as if words had weight. Rayan stayed where he was, one hand resting lightly against the concrete wall, grounding himself. Apologies were rare currencies in his world, and he'd learned not to spend trust too quickly. Celeste didn't rush him, and that alone marked a difference. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said. "I'm asking you to let me understand the constraints I helped create." He considered her, eyes sharp but tired. "Understanding doesn't change the margins." "No," she agreed, "action does." They walked again, slower this time. The building's hidden arteries hummed around them, a reminder that structure mattered. When they reached the junction near the security room, Rayan stopped. "I can't stay late tonight," he said, "or early tomorrow. If the shuttle changes, I need contingency time." Celeste nodded. "I can authorize flexibility. That's temporary." "Yes," she said, "so is denial." The honesty surprised them both. Upstairs, Celeste convened a small meeting. No board, no vendors. Just operations, HR, and legal. She stripped the problem down to logistics and risk, refusing euphemisms. "If one employee's absence destabilizes our security posture," she said, "then the system is already broken." Legal shifted uncomfortably. HR cleared their throat. "Precedent is a shield we hide behind." Celeste cut in. "I want a framework, not an exception." By the time the meeting ended, she had resistance instead of agreement. It was a start. Downstairs, Rayan worked through the afternoon with the same precision as always, but something in him stayed alert to her movements now. Not hopeful, cautious. Systems failed most often when assumptions crept in. Gideon sidled up, voice low. "She's been asking about policy reform." "Real reform?" Rayan didn't look up. "People ask when pressure reaches them." "Do you think she means it?" Rayan paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "I think she's uncomfortable." "That's good, right?" "It's unstable," Rayan said. "But instability is how change starts." Near the end of the shift, another alert flickered, not critical, but familiar. Rayan traced it back to a misaligned authentication bridge, the same pattern as before. He logged it, flagged it, and left it untouched. Some problems needed to be seen by the right people. At 6, he clocked out. This time, Celeste didn't follow. She watched from the window as he crossed the lobby, noticing the way staff unconsciously made space for him now. Not deference, recognition. Outside, dusk pressed low. Rayan took the bus again, mind already mapping tomorrow's risks. When he reached the apartment, Noah was awake, sitting up with a book balanced on his knees. "You're early," Noah said. "Just right," Rayan replied. They ate quietly. Later, as Noah slept, Rayan checked the equipment, then stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker. Somewhere out there, a system was deciding whether it would bend or break. Across town, Celeste sat alone in her office long after the building emptied. She reviewed numbers that never made it into quarterly reports: retention costs, burnout metrics, legal settlements framed as operational noise. She saw patterns she'd ignored before. She drafted a proposal and deleted it, too cautious. She drafted another and saved it, too bold. At midnight, she sent a single email to herself. Subject line blank, body simple. Start with the margins. The next morning, the building woke to a rumor. Not gossip, anticipation. HR meetings scheduled. Operations pulled into workshops. No announcement, but movement. Rayan felt it as he logged in. Systems respond to attention, he thought. Celeste arrived early and went straight to the security room, ignoring the surprised looks. She stood beside Rayan, not over him. "There will be pushback," she said quietly. "From the board, from legal." "There always is," Rayan said. "I want you to document everything you've been compensating for," she continued. "Not just technical, human." He turned to her, expression guarded. "Why?" "Because if I don't see it laid out," she said, "I'll forget when it becomes inconvenient." He studied her, then nodded once. "I'll need time." "You'll have it." The words hung there, commitment, not command. As she turned to leave, an alert finally tipped red on the boardroom floor above them. The misaligned bridge Rayan had flagged triggered a chain reaction, locking out a subset of executive access. Celeste stopped, looked back. Rayan met her gaze. "This one needs to be public," she understood immediately. "Do it." He moved, steady and precise, as staff gathered, whispers rising. The system failure wasn't catastrophic, but it was visible. And visibility was leverage. As the locks released and access restored, Celeste addressed the onlookers. "This disruption," she said evenly, "is the cost of ignoring the people who keep us running." Rayan stepped back into the background where he'd always stood, but the ground under that space had shifted. The apology had been the opening. What came next would decide whether it mattered. The disruption echoed longer than the alert itself. Executives clustered in the corridor, voices tight, phones pressed to ears. The system was stable again, but embarrassment lingered like smoke. Rayan returned to his station without ceremony, letting others fill the silence with speculation. Celeste didn't retreat this time. She stayed visible, answering questions without deflection, repeating the same line until it sank in. This is what happens when maintenance is treated as background noise. The phrase traveled fast. By midday, the board requested an emergency briefing. Not a call, in person. Power didn't like being inconvenienced twice. Rayan felt the shift immediately. When systems drew attention upward, they also drew pressure downward. He reviewed logs, double-checked redundancies, and prepared for the possibility that his work would be scrutinized instead of ignored. Gideon leaned against the doorframe, uneasy. "They're looking for someone to blame." "They always are," Rayan said. "And you?" Rayan paused. "I'm prepared." That afternoon, Celeste stood before the board in a room designed to intimidate. Glass table, city views, silent assistants lining the walls. She didn't bring vendors. She didn't bring legal. She brought data. "What you experienced," she said calmly, "wasn't a failure of software. It was a failure of assumptions." A board member scoffed. "You're blaming culture for a technical glitch?" "I'm blaming blindness," Celeste replied. "Specifically ours." She laid out the timeline, the ignored warnings, the way critical functions had been stabilized quietly by someone no one listened to, until they had to. Downstairs, Rayan watched a live feed of access permissions ripple as board members badge in. His screen told a parallel story, stress points lighting up in anticipation. He made one adjustment, then another, building buffers no one had asked for. If this turned into a spectacle, it needed to be controlled. The board session dragged, resistance hardened, questions sharpened. "Why wasn't this escalated sooner?" someone demanded. Celeste answered without hesitation, "Because the person who understood it wasn't empowered to speak." Silence followed, heavy, dangerous. "Who?" another voice pressed. Celeste exhaled. "The night security officer. That did it." The request came down fast and sharp. "Bring him up." Gideon relayed the message, face pale. They want you in the boardroom. Rayan nodded. He straightened his jacket, checked his watch, and followed Gideon toward the elevators. Every step felt familiar, not because he'd been here before, but because he'd been in rooms like it, where decisions were made quickly and consequences lasted. When the doors opened, conversation stalled. Eyes tracked him in, measuring uniform against power. Rayan stood where Celeste indicated, not at the table, not in the shadows, in between. "Explain," a board member said curtly. Rayan didn't launch into credentials. He described the system the way it was, its strengths, its fractures, the risks compounded by human shortcuts. He spoke plainly, precisely, answering questions before they were fully formed. As he talked, something shifted. Not admiration, recognition. Celeste watched it happen, chest tight. This was the exposure phase. Unavoidable now, public, irreversible. When he finished, the room was quiet. "You're telling us," one member said slowly, "that we've been relying on undocumented fixes performed off-book?" "Yes," Rayan said, "because the documented path doesn't account for real-world constraints." "And you?" another asked. "Why didn't you report this?" Rayan met their gaze. "I did, through the only channel available to me." Eyes turned to Celeste. She didn't flinch. "I dismissed it." That landed harder than any technical detail. The board recessed. Decisions whispered behind closed doors. Rayan waited outside with Gideon, pulse steady but mind alert. He didn't expect gratitude. He expected fallout. Celeste joined them minutes later. "They want a proposal," she said. "From you." Rayan raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "A redesign," she replied, "technical and human." He considered. "I'll need access." "You'll have it. And time." She nodded. "You'll have that, too." He exhaled slowly. "Then I'll do it." As he turned to leave, Celeste added, "There will be resistance." "There always is," Rayan said, echoing her words from before. That night he worked late, not at the tower but at the kitchen table, notebook open, margins redrawn. He mapped systems the way he mapped Noah's care. Redundancies, buffers, human fail-safes built into rigid structures. If you're still with this story, subscribe now, because this is where preparation turns into confrontation, and quiet work starts changing visible power. Across town, Celeste sent messages she knew would cost her favors. She canceled a gala, delayed a partnership, reallocated budget toward infrastructure no one would praise her for. The next morning, Noah woke, breathing easier. Rayan noted it, smiled faintly, and packed the lunchbox. At the tower, the building waited. Not for orders, for a new way to function. The proposal didn't soften the board. It sharpened them. By morning, questions arrived in blocks. Financial exposure, liability, optics. Rayan read them without reaction, cataloging which were about risk and which were about control. The difference mattered. He worked from the security room, not the executive floor. Celeste hadn't offered an office, and he hadn't asked. Proximity to systems mattered more than proximity to power. Gideon watched him draft diagrams that looked nothing like corporate slide decks. "They're not going to like this," he said. "They don't have to," Rayan replied. "They just have to understand the cost of not doing it." By noon, the first resistance arrived in person. A senior operations director stepped into the security room with a tight smile. "You're proposing redundancy that cuts into margins." Rayan nodded. "Yes." "And flexible scheduling that sets precedent." "Yes." "And you expect us to justify this to shareholders?" Rayan finally looked up. "You justify it by not locking your executives out of their own building." The director flushed. That was an anomaly. It was a warning, Rayan said calmly. You ignored the first one. The director left without another word. Celeste observed from the corridor, arms crossed, absorbing the pushback like a physical force. This was the cost she'd known was coming. Power didn't surrender without a fight. That afternoon, the building tested them again. A vendor update, approved weeks ago, rolled out automatically, colliding with Rayan's temporary fixes. Alarms flared. Access flickered. The same failure pattern threatened to cascade, this time during peak hours. Voices rose, phones rang. Panic rippled outward. Rayan moved. He didn't wait for permission. He isolated the update, rerouted authentication, and stabilized the system in under 2 minutes. Not perfect. Enough. Celeste stepped into the open space as staff gathered, faces tight with fear. Everyone breathe, she said. It's contained. A board member, visiting unannounced, stared at the screens. You approved this redesign? Yes, Celeste said. And this disruption? Proves why we need it. The man turned to Rayan. You did that just now? Rayan nodded. Yes. You realize you're exposing us to risk. Rayan met his gaze. You're already exposed. I'm reducing it. Silence followed, heavy, public. The board member studied him, then Celeste. We'll discuss, he said finally. He walked away, leaving tension in his wake. Rayan exhaled slowly. His hands were steady, but his mind drifted to Noah, to the morning check, to the thinner margins this week. Every extra demand here pressed there, Celeste noticed. You can go, she said quietly. There's more to document, he replied. I'll cover it. He hesitated, then nodded. Trust was still provisional. At the apartment, Noah was restless. Rayan adjusted the monitor, recalculated dosage, watched the numbers settle. Relief came in degrees, not absolutes. You tired? Noah asked. Rayan smiled. A little. You always fix things, Noah said, eyes already drifting closed. Rayan swallowed. Not always, but I try. Back at the tower, Celeste stayed late again. She reviewed the proposal line by line, attaching her name where it would hurt. She sent it to the board with a note stripped of flourish. This is necessary. The response came an hour later. Conditional approval. Pilot program. Limited scope. It wasn't victory. It was foothold. The next day, implementation began. Small changes, visible ones. Shift adjustments posted without penalty language. Maintenance logs elevated. Feedback loops formalized. Rayan watched it unfold with cautious focus. Systems improved when people believed they mattered, but pressure didn't disappear. It redirected. An executive cornered Celeste in the elevator. You're betting a lot on one man. Celeste didn't look away. I'm betting on seeing what's been invisible. That evening, as Rayan prepared to leave, an alert blinked amber. Not urgent, familiar, he flagged it. This time, instead of ignoring it, operations escalated immediately. Progress. He clocked out and headed for the bus, phone buzzing with a message from the clinic. Appointment confirmed. Shuttle unchanged, for now. Margins held. From her office window, Celeste watched him leave, uniform blending into the city. She knew the next test wouldn't be technical. It would be political, and it would be public. The system had begun to change. Now it had to survive being seen. Visibility changed the temperature of everything. What had once been tolerated as background effort now drew heat, scrutiny, and agendas. Rayan felt it the moment he stepped into the building. People watching not to learn, but to judge. That kind of attention bent systems in different ways. The pilot program moved forward anyway. Access protocols were rewritten in plain language. Maintenance reports surfaced at executive briefings instead of being buried in appendices. Shift flexibility appeared on schedules without explanation, just quiet implementation. Some staff relaxed for the first time in years. Others bristled, sensing loss disguised as progress. Celeste absorbed the friction like ballast. She attended meetings she'd once delegated, repeated explanations she'd already given, refused to let the narrative drift toward special treatment. Every time someone tried to reduce it to one man, she pulled it back to structure. "This isn't about him," she said more than once. "It's about what happens when we ignore the margins." The board scheduled a formal review. Public-facing, staff present, transparency framed as reassurance. Celeste recognized the maneuver immediately. Visibility as pressure. She accepted. The morning of the review, Rayon arrived early. He didn't wear anything different. Uniform pressed, badge clipped. He reviewed logs one last time, ensuring the system could stand without him if it had to. Gideon hovered nearby, nervous energy crackling. "This feels like a trap." "It's a test," Rayon said. "Traps rely on panic." The auditorium filled slowly. Executives in the front rows, staff lining the sides, cameras set up for internal broadcast. The building watched itself. Celeste opened the session with data, clear, unembellished. She outlined the failures, the fixes, the early results. Reduced downtime, improved response times, no catastrophic incidents. A board member leaned forward. "And the cost?" Celeste didn't dodge it. "Higher up front, lower long term." "And the risk?" She gestured toward Rayon, managed. Eyes followed her hand. The question came as expected. "Why is a security officer leading infrastructure redesign?" Rayon felt the room tighten. This was the moment he'd prepared for, without ever wanting it. Celeste answered first. "Because he understands the system." "That's not an answer," the board member said. "It is," she replied. "You just don't like it." Murmurs rippled. The board member turned to Rayon. "Do you have formal qualifications for this work?" "Yes," Rayon said. "Then why weren't they disclosed?" "Because no one asked," he replied evenly, "and because my role didn't require them until the system failed." A pause. Calculations happening behind eyes. Another member spoke up. "Are we to believe you've been compensating for institutional blind spots this entire time?" Rayon nodded, quietly. "And without authorization?" "Yes." The word authorization hung heavy. Celeste felt the room pivot. This was the inversion, where arrogance met consequence in public. Poetic without cruelty. The board member smiled thinly. "That's a liability." Rayon met his gaze. "So is ignoring reality." Silence followed. The cameras hummed. A staff member in the back raised a hand, voice shaking but clear. "If he hadn't done that work, would we have lost access again?" Rayon didn't answer. Celeste did. "Yes." Another voice followed, then another. Small testimonies, missed warnings, near failures. The invisible labor surfaced, piece by piece. The board recessed again, but this time the waiting felt different. Less dread, more inevitability. When they returned, the decision was measured, cautious, and public. The pilot would expand. Oversight would formalize. Rayon would be seconded to a cross-functional role, without stripping his current one. It wasn't elevation, it was alignment. Celeste announced it without flourish. "We fix systems by listening to the people who keep them alive." Applause followed, not thunderous, earned. Rayon stood still, absorbing none of it. His mind had already shifted, homeward, to Noah, to the check he needed to make. As the room emptied, Celeste approached him. "That went as well as it could have," he nodded. "For the building." "And for you?" he considered. It doesn't make the margins disappear. No, she said, but it widens them. They stood there, not equals, but no longer misaligned. That evening, Rayan left on time. The bus ride felt shorter, the city less heavy. At the apartment, Noah greeted him with a grin and steady breathing. "Did you fix it?" Noah asked. Rayan smiled. "We're working on it." Later, as Noah slept, Rayan sat at the table and closed the notebook for the first time in weeks. Not because the work was done, but because it was finally shared. Back at the tower, Celeste watched the lights go out floor by floor. The building felt quieter, sturdier. She knew the board would test her again. Power always did, but the reckoning had already happened. Not in anger, in daylight, and that made all the difference. The expansion didn't arrive with celebration. It arrived with forms, timelines, and the slow grind of implementation that tested patience more than resolve. Rayan preferred it that way. Quiet progress was harder to undo. He settled into the dual rhythm, security work that still anchored him to the building's pulse, and advisory sessions where his voice carried weight without ceremony. He spoke less than others expected. When he did, the rooms listened. Not everyone approved. An executive bypassed the new reporting channel one afternoon, pushing a rushed change through an old pathway. The system caught it, logged it, flagged it. Rayan forwarded the alert without comment. By evening, the executive's access was temporarily restricted, not by punishment but by protocol. The reaction was immediate and loud. "This is absurd," the executive snapped in the corridor outside Celeste's office. "I outrank half the people who approved this." Celeste didn't raise her voice. "You outrank no one when it comes to safety. That guard is following the same rules as everyone else," she finished, "including me." The executive left furious. The rule held. Word spread. Downstairs, Gideon watched the exchange from afar, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've never seen her do that." Rayan didn't look up from the console. Systems hold when leaders let them. The clinic called that night with a change. A slot had opened earlier than expected. Short notice, non-negotiable. Rayan checked the schedule, heart tightening. He could make it, but only if he left an hour early. He walked to Celeste's office himself. She looked up as he knocked, surprise flickering before composure returned. "What's wrong?" "I need tomorrow afternoon," Rayan said. No preamble, no apology. She glanced at her calendar. Back-to-back meetings, board calls, visibility. This was the moment policy met practice. "Take it," she said immediately. "I'll cover." Relief came sharp and dangerous. Rayan nodded. "Thank you." "That's not a favor," she said. "That's the system working." The next day, he left early without glances following him, without whispers. The badge scanned green. The log updated automatically. No friction. At the clinic, Noah squeezed his hand, fingers warm and steady. The appointment went long, then longer. Adjustments made, new parameters set. The margins widened just enough to breathe. "You did good," the nurse said quietly. Rayan smiled, tired but real. Back at the tower, Celeste faced the board again, this time over access discipline. She didn't bend. She presented data, not defense. When challenged, she redirected. "You wanted resilience," she said. "This is what it looks like." After the meeting, she sat alone, letting the weight settle. Authority felt different now. Less sharp, more deliberate. When Rayan returned the following morning, the building felt steadier. Alerts fewer. Conversations quieter. A work happening where it should. A junior analyst approached him near the security room, hesitant. "Sir, Rayan, I just wanted to say, it's easier to speak up now." Rayan nodded. Then the system's improving. That afternoon, Celeste called him in, not to her office but to the operations floor. Open space, people around. I want you to review the next phase, she said, not alone, with the team. He hesitated. I don't want to be the face of this. She met his eyes. Then don't be. Be the standard. He agreed. The review unfolded in daylight, collaborative and unglamorous. Problems surfaced, solutions layered. No one dismissed the small things anymore. As the session ended, Celeste lingered. I owe you more than an apology, she said quietly. Rayan considered her. You owed the building attention, he replied. You gave it. That doesn't erase what I did. No, he agreed, but it changes what happens next. That evening, as he packed up, Rayan removed the medical pouch from the lunchbox. He checked the seals, replaced a worn strap, and reattached it with care. The ritual mattered. Outside, the city moved as it always had. Indifferent, relentless. Inside, a system once blind now adjusted its focus. Celeste watched from the lobby as Rayan left, not following this time. She didn't need to. The distance between them had changed shape. No longer vertical, but parallel. Power hadn't been stripped from her. It had been refined. And dignity, once overlooked, now moved through the building like current. Quiet, essential, impossible to ignore. The building learned slowly, the way all systems did when they were forced to abandon shortcuts. It wasn't dramatic anymore. No alarms, no headlines, just steadier days, cleaner handoffs, fewer emergencies born from neglect. Rayan noticed it most in the quiet, when nothing happened, and that nothing held. He logged in that morning and scanned the board. Green across the grid, predictable load, clean margins. He allowed himself a breath before checking his phone. A message from the clinic confirmed the new schedule. Fewer visits, wider gaps, a fragile but real improvement. At home, Noah was sitting at the table, cereal untouched, drawing careful lines on paper. I made the building, he said, holding it up. Boxes stacked neatly, lines connecting them. Rayan smiled. Looks strong. It is, Noah said, because you fixed it. Rayan crouched beside him. A lot of people helped. Noah shrugged. You started it. That stayed with him on the bus ride in, the city passing in its usual blur. He didn't think of himself as someone who started things. He stabilized them. He kept them from falling apart. But maybe beginnings and maintenance weren't as different as he'd believed. At the tower, Celeste stood in the lobby without her phone, watching people arrive. The change was subtle, but undeniable. Guards spoke up. Staff asked questions. Executives waited instead of pushing past. Power still existed, but it moved with friction now, and friction meant awareness. She caught sight of Rayan and inclined her head. Not a signal, an acknowledgement. They didn't need to talk. The system was doing that for them. Midday brought a final test, not of infrastructure but of narrative. A journalist requested comment on recent operational disruptions. Old Celeste would have denied, minimized, buried. She agreed to a short statement instead. This wasn't a failure, she said evenly. It was a correction. We learned what happens when you ignore the people who keep things running. The article ran quietly. No scandal, no praise, just truth. Rayan read it on his break, then closed the browser. Attention faded. Work remained. That afternoon, the new accommodation framework rolled out company-wide, not with fanfare but with clarity. Requests logged, responses timed. No shame language, no penalties hidden in footnotes. Gideon stopped by, grinning. You realize people are calling this the Holt Protocol. Rayan frowned. They shouldn't. I know, Gideon said. But they are. Rayan shook his head. Names turn systems into monuments. They should stay flexible. Gideon laughed. You're impossible. Functional, Rayan corrected. As the day wound down, Celeste joined a small group on the operations floor, reviewing early metrics. She didn't lead the conversation. She listened. When she spoke, it was to ask better questions. When Rayan prepared to leave, she walked over. I wanted to say something, she began. He waited. I followed you because I thought you were hiding a problem, she said. I didn't expect to find a responsibility I'd helped make heavier. You can't see everything, Rayan replied. No, she agreed, but I can decide what I do when I finally do see it. They stood there, the distance between them no longer charged. That evening, Rayan left on time. No delays, no glances. The bus ride felt ordinary, and that felt like victory. At home, Noah met him at the door, breathing steady, eyes bright. They ate together. They laughed at nothing. Later, as Noah slept, Rayan packed the lunchbox for the next day, checking the medical pouch one last time. Still there, still ready. He sat at the table and opened the notebook, not to plan emergencies but to sketch something new. A future with fewer margins, fewer silent calculations. Across town, Celeste turned off the lights in her office and paused, looking out at the city she'd once treated like an extension of her will. It felt different now, more complex, more alive. She didn't regret losing the illusion of control. She regretted how long it had taken. The building stood behind her, stronger, quieter, held together by people who were finally allowed to be seen. Somewhere within it, a night guard did his job, not as a symbol, but as a man whose dignity no longer needed defending. If this story stayed with you, ask me for the next story title. Subscribe and don't miss our next story, The Fired Cleaner Who Walked Back into the Boardroom with One File. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?
Hey, staff aren't supposed to touch that piano, especially tonight.
The hotel cleaner's fingers hovered over the keys as laughter rolled softly behind the warning, someone muttering about knowing one's place at a billion-dollar gala. Crystal glasses clinked, silk brushed marble, and the message settled in. This wasn't his room. Instead of stepping away, he pressed one key, then another, the sound calm and deliberate. Across the lobby, the CEO's posture stiffened, her gaze snapping toward the melody like she'd been called by name. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. What was really happening beneath the surface wasn't about a rule broken or a piano touched. It was about memory colliding with power, about a song that refused to stay buried, and about how truth doesn't ask permission before it speaks. Before anyone noticed, the air had changed, and the hierarchy everyone trusted had started to crack. He didn't look up when a second voice hissed that security would be called. He didn't apologize. He just kept playing, shoulders loose, tempo steady, like the room had finally gone quiet enough to hear him. The melody was simple at first, almost shy, then it folded inward, carrying something unfinished, something aching. Julian Mercer had learned long ago that reacting only fed people who mistook noise for control. Calm was harder to argue with. He wore a cleaner's uniform because it paid the bills and let him leave before midnight. He stayed because his son needed routine more than recognition. Noah sat on a bench near the service corridor, knees tucked to his chest, eyes fixed on the polished floor. Crowds made his breathing hitch sometimes, especially when voices sharpened. The piano had always helped. It was the one sound that smoothed the edges of his world, even when nothing else could. A woman in a tailored black dress stepped closer. Irritation etched into her smile. "This event is private," she said, gesturing toward the keys. "You're disrupting it." He nodded once, not in agreement but acknowledgement, and let the melody answer for him. A few guests rolled their eyes. Someone scoffed about background noise. No one noticed the way the CEO's hand tightened around her glass, knuckles paling as recognition crept in against her will. The song shifted, revealing its spine. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't meant to impress. It was a confession shaped like music, and it carried the weight of something written for one person alone. Noah's shoulders eased, his breathing slowed. He leaned back against the wall, trusting the sound more than the room. The events director, Marianne Holt, hovered at the edge of the crowd, caught between protocol and instinct. She'd heard hundreds of pianists play that instrument. None like this. None who made the room feel smaller and more exposed at the same time. "Should I stop him?" a security guard whispered. Marianne hesitated. "Wait," she said quietly, though she wasn't sure why. The CEO took a step forward before she realized she was moving. Ilara Whitcomb had built her empire on precision and control, on never letting the past dictate the present. But the melody reached places money never could. It carried a name she hadn't spoken in decades, a promise left unfinished, a life she'd sealed away behind success. The cleaner's hands moved with certainty, not show. The rhythm breathed. Guests fell silent one by one, unsure when they decided to listen. Phones lowered. Whispers died. Someone finally recognized the tune. "That song," a woman murmured, confusion threading her voice. "I've never heard it recorded." Because it wasn't meant to be. Julian felt the moment cresting, the way a tide changed before it turned. He kept his eyes on the keys. This wasn't for them, it never had been. It was for the boy breathing easier behind him, and for the part of himself he'd folded away to survive. Ilara stopped a few feet from the piano. Her composure cracked, just enough to be seen. The room watched, sensing significance without understanding it yet. Power didn't vanish in that instant, but it faltered, unsure of its footing. The final notes lingered, unresolved by design. He lifted his hands and let the silence finish what sound had started. Noah looked up, calm now, eyes searching for his father's face. Julian turned and met his gaze, offering a small nod that said everything was okay. Behind them, the gala stood frozen, guests suspended between spectacle and truth. And in that stillness everyone felt it. The unmistakable sense that something private had just become impossible to ignore. Silence held the lobby after the last note faded, thick enough to feel against skin. No one clapped, no one spoke. The kind of pause that made people aware of their own breathing settled in, broken only by the soft hum of chandeliers overhead. He stayed seated, hands resting, loosely in his lap, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if the room hadn't just tilted on its axis. Ilara Whitcomb was the first to move. She didn't rush, she didn't retreat. She simply stood there, eyes fixed on the piano, jaw tight, memories pressing hard against a present she controlled with ruthless discipline. A few guests followed her gaze, then looked back at the man in the uniform, recalculating him in real time. "That's enough," someone muttered near the bar, uncertain now. "This isn't appropriate." Marianne Holt stepped forward, voice measured but strained. "We'll take a short pause," she announced, lifting her hand slightly. "Please enjoy refreshments while we reset." No one moved. The word reset felt inadequate. The cleaner finally stood, smoothing his sleeves, and turned toward the bench where his son waited. Noah's eyes were bright but calm, his chest rising evenly now. Relief loosened something in the man's shoulders as he crossed the few steps between them. "You okay?" he asked quietly. The boy nodded. "It helped," he said, simple and sure. That certainty mattered more than the room full of strangers. Behind them, whispers spread, cautious at first, then bolder. Someone recognized the melody's structure, the way it refused a clean ending. Someone else mentioned a composer who'd vanished years ago, a name spoken carefully, like it might bruise. Alara heard it all. She felt the weight of eyes turning toward her, waiting for explanation, command, dismissal. Her world didn't allow unanswered questions, especially not public ones. She straightened, preparing to reclaim the narrative. "Who allowed this?" she asked, voice steady but colder now. Marianne hesitated. "He was calming his child," she said. "There was no disruption until he disrupted," Ilara cut in. He turned at that, meeting her gaze without challenge. "I'll stop," he said simply. "We're leaving." The ease of it disarmed a few people. He wasn't pleading, he wasn't defiant, just practical. "That won't be necessary," Ilara replied, though she wasn't sure why the words came out that way. She gestured toward the piano. "That song, where did you learn it?" A ripple moved through the crowd. This wasn't the dismissal they'd expected. He considered her question, eyes flicking briefly to Noah before answering. "I wrote it," he said. The words landed softly, devastating in their quiet. Someone laughed, too loud, too quick. "That's impossible." Alara didn't laugh. Color drained from her face as recognition locked into place, undeniable now. The room seemed to lean closer. "You're saying," she began, then stopped, breath catching. "That melody was never finished," he said gently. "It wasn't meant for anyone else." The gala fractured into murmurs. Phones came out despite the etiquette drilled into everyone here. Marianne watched it happen, the moment slipping beyond containment. If you're feeling that pause right now, subscribe, because this is where the truth stops being private and starts changing people. Ilara took a step closer, her authority suddenly irrelevant against the gravity of memory. "Your name?" she said. He hesitated, then shook his head. "That doesn't matter." "It matters to me," she replied, almost too quietly. He studied her face, the power, the polish, the woman who'd built walls high enough to keep the past out until music found a way in. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight's for him." Noah shifted closer, sensing the attention. Small hand slipping into his father's. The gesture grounded him. Around them, guests began to understand that this wasn't entertainment, it was exposure. Something intimate unfolding where spectacle usually lived. Alara straightened again, composure returning in fragments. "We'll continue the event," she announced, though no one missed the tremor. "Thank you for your contribution." The word contribution sounded fragile. He nodded once, already turning away, guiding his son toward the service corridor. The crowd parted without realizing they'd done it, eyes following them with new awareness. Behind them, the piano sat untouched, its truth released into a room built on appearances. And Alara Whitcomb stood very still, surrounded by witnesses who'd just seen power hesitate for the first time. They slipped into the service corridor, the door swinging shut behind them with a soft final click that cut off the murmur of the gala. The air back there smelled faintly of polish and detergent, familiar and grounding. He slowed his pace once they were out of sight, releasing a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Noah leaned into his side as they walked, small fingers still curled tight, the echo of the melody lingering between them like warmth. Behind the door, the lobby struggled to remember itself. Guests attempted conversation, laughter landing in the wrong places, too loud or too late. No one quite knew how to proceed when the emotional center of the room had just walked away in a maintenance uniform. Eyes kept drifting toward the piano, then toward the CEO, waiting to see which one would be acknowledged first. The hierarchy everyone trusted felt oddly incomplete now. Elara remained where she was, glass untouched in her hand. The words he'd spoken replayed relentlessly, precise and devastating.